Hello and welcome to the podcast where we explore all the aspects of audio storytelling, whether it's actual plays or audio narrative, scripted audio narrative. And today I'm delighted to go in a slightly different tangent by talking to Sam Morris. Sam, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hello. So I run the Pickaxe podcast network for the Yogscast. So it's a general gaming, gay geek culture podcast network from the awesome team at the Yogscast, but we focus on creators outside of the Yogscast internationally, everywhere. And our goal is to really scratch every itch for the gaming sort of listener there. So from news to the latest stuff to a bit of let's play, the right through to story narrative. We've even dabbled into a bit of health stuff as well. So
Okay,
that's
interesting.
what we do.
Well, let's explore that because over time we're going to start though because obviously you're coming from an area that's much more close to home to my native territory of games. So obviously for those who know, I'm a video games exec type and I've been working in the games industry for about 30 years, as well as doing my for fun actual play podcast and this interview process. And what I've been doing is trying to explore all of the different aspects of it. Now, I mean, what is it? Because obviously Yogscast are well known for the sort of YouTube and the Let's Plays and the kind of Minecrafts of this world and the creating their own stories around that context. What has enticed them into the world of podcast?
So it was a really organic thing, as just like how they got started really with the YouTube side of things. Right place, right time. Genuine people having fun playing, and that was there was an audience there that wasn't being served, and it kind of grew through from that. And I think generally when you make content, you're always curious to try the different areas as they come up. And podcasting was kind of one of those things. And naturally, they had a handful of podcasts they tried that were doing quite well, and the vision was to kind of, can we expand that one out? But it's actually quite interesting. Yogscast did actually start as a podcast. It was the Yogpod initially. Yeah. So actually it's the older part of the company, but the YouTube picked up, and the Yogpod became Triforce, and excuse me, which is our flagship sort of content there. But yeah, it came out, and in 2021, handful of podcasts, they wanted to make it its own network, and that's when I came in to kind of really grab hold of it and see what we could make of it.
And I still remember Rich Keith, who's an old friend of mine who you will know, I'm sure, when he first started talking about this, I had some awareness of who Yogscast were at that point, but it was only really, I really noticed what a momentum they had, what a scale that they were reaching when Rich was talking about it in his role in their kind of, I think he was CRO at the time. And, I find it really kind of fascinating when you talk to somebody who's looking at this from a commercial point of view, who had that track record in games journalism and kind of game magazines, because I knew him from that era. Yeah. When you see the fact that the YouTube environment had grown up into this commercial space was news. I mean, to me at that time.
Yeah, it's
I mean, are you seeing the same thing happening as we move into podcasts?
Kind of. It's really interesting. We're starting to see a little bit of friction kind of between the two at the moment, because they both come from very different places. So just as you described there with the YouTube, it was this surprise beast that came out due to the new technology and everybody being so connected. The legacy outlets kind of were caught off guard, as they often are, of new technology. And what developed there was a really, really interesting from scratch way of operating. They figured out how to monetize it, what's the best way to work with it, how to be respectful with those adverts and the audiences, but ultimately how to fund these things going forward. And it was this homegrown, how best to serve this specific industry. But with podcasting, we come from broadcast, really. So the way they've decided to manage it, so everybody's worked in radio or TV, and it's a lot of spreadsheets. It's a lot of decimal places here and there, and it's a very different world. And where Spotify is now bringing a lot of focus onto video podcasts, they want to kind of be the new YouTube, and where YouTube podcasts are getting a lot of attention, there's a big push in the podcasting world to kind of, it's video, get on YouTube. But they're two very different beasts, two very different worlds. And my job, actually, mostly managing the network, is working with YouTube creators and the podcast industry. And I'm a translator kind of between the two, because, the creators expect it to work like YouTube, and the podcast world expect them to act like other podcasters. And it's this constant negotiation, but it's really interesting. The dynamics that kind of come up because of that, they are very, very different.
Yeah, and I found it when you're talking about it, because my immediate impression of the difference is the difference between live versus pre-recorded, which is itself a fundamental framing of the process. But what you seem to be implying is it's more than just that. It's more than just an audience. It's a kind of complete commercial mindset difference.
It really is production process. So anything of the how it's made is one arm, and then you've got the audience as well. How it's consumed there is a lot more overlaps from the audience point of view. And I personally, I'll have podcasts that I listen to. Sometimes I watch them on YouTube. Sometimes I'll catch up on Spotify, and there is the overlap, I think, there. But definitely on the business end. Yeah.
Would you watch one of those as a live thing and then listen to it as a podcast? So my suspicion is you're either in live consumption mode or you're not. Is that fair?
Yeah, so it tends to be, there's an element of what the podcast is itself, and is there a lot of visual mentioned? So, are the guests referring to things that are then shown on screen, and you are really curious that you need to see that? Or it really depends what time of the day it is. If I'm super keen to listen to somebody, but I'm on a commute, I'm gonna put it on, on Spotify. But if it's a home of an evening, I'm trying to wind down. Even if I'm not paying a lot of visual attention to it, I'll put it on the big screen in the background. So it's kind of, they do transfer, and sometimes I'll pick up the same podcast on a totally different platform halfway through. It really is. It's kind of like how do you describe a podcast? What is the definition? It's a grey area. Everyone's got their own. Even in the industry, we can't fully agree on what an actual podcast is.
And I think the key thing is that video versus. I mean, you mentioned it with the Spotify, the video versus. And when we're looking at kind of the difference, I tend to look at the stuff that I'm tending to look at, from the scripted piece to the live improvised piece. And, I'd argue that, a podcast is kind of even further down that kind of live improv. You're not constrained by a rule set. You're not constrained by a story. You're not constrained by dice. Well, you've probably got questions, or tend to have questions. I fully improvise. But there's a spectrum, because I think in every case, we're telling some kind of story. We're exploring something, whether it's a real world thing or whether it's a fantasy or science fiction thing. So my feeling is that what we're saying is that there's a pattern of consumption where we're finding the most appropriate way. So defining what a podcast is becomes super complicated the moment you have the option to watch video.
Yeah, it really does put a spanner in the works.
Yeah, and in the gaming space, in the kind of tabletop style gaming space, the biggest example of that is the VTT, so the virtual tabletop. So where there's a map, well, I'm going to move 5 feet to the right. Well, what does that mean on the audio feed?
Yeah, how visually dependent do they come in these sorts of things? You're adding those extra layers, which are really great for one audience, but then you can risk alienating another because it's not as accessible on those devices. It becomes really difficult, and it's really interesting seeing how people are sort of figuring it out. And then you can throw the further spanner in the works and talk about live streaming, which again is a very similar, it's a cousin, but it's a very different audience again, and they're getting a very different thing out of it as well. And it is fascinating to see, how people are feeling their way through these problems and building out these, seeing who is successful.
And I've been lucky enough to chat to a few of the kind of streaming tabletop folks. And what I find interesting about that is the way that the live moment, that performative live moment, because it's a bit more like theatre, you can't take it back. And then the dice roll happens. So you've got the narrative structure, you've got the dice roll, you've got the performance. But what's interesting as well is not only do you have that, but you've got the person playing the character and the character, and they both react. It's the same person, but they're going to have an in-character reaction and a personal reaction, which is part of the experience as a viewer.
Yeah. Definitely. I think we mentioned this when we were chatting, weren't we, at the podcast convention. But I used to work in corporate entertainment. So it was all the old paintballing days and various things like that. And what we would do was, it was about kind of getting big company teams together, to departments that wouldn't normally talk together, accounts versus sales. Maybe they're slightly combative, but you'd get them down, you'd mix them up, put them in a trench together, and having that shared experience that they're going to get shot and it's going to hurt, so you've got to work together. That kind of forges a bond. And it always struck me that the live, anyway, the streaming there, even to a point, I think the podcast releases once it's recorded as well, is that you're sharing that experience in that same way with the audience, that the player does not know what's going to happen next. And to a point, neither does the games master. You know, they might have the idea where they're pointing it, but it is on the roll of the dice. So you're all sharing that experience at the same time. And it is that sort of bond that you're discovering it together, which is a really unique thing. It's why I think the TTRPG side of things is one of my favorite, just because of that relationship with the audience is there and the quality of the stories that come out of it.
Yes. And the quality of the stories, because they have to always yes and. They can't step back. They can't retrofit. They can't retcon anything. But I was going to go a little bit further on another angle. So I wonder, as you were talking, it occurred to me, we have a similar moment when we're doing Let's Play.
Mm.
When someone's doing something in a Minecraft or whatever and accidentally bumps into a zombie and gets killed, those moments themselves create a common shared experience between you, the player, and the audience watching. You know, they got to be there at that point in time. And it's not maybe quite the same as a roll of a dice. Whilst you're here, don't forget to check out our actual play, The Anything Could Happen show, on YouTube and all good podcast sites, where I put my guest players through no-win scenarios with limited information and always against the clock. And of course, where anything could happen.
Let me say personally that while I detest you and what the Vigilant Tide are doing, I can appreciate that you want the good of the colony.
Of course.
Are you willing to set aside your career as a leader and face the consequences of your decisions for the good of the colony, if it were to come to that?
I am an elected official.
Are you?
Yes.
It doesn't seem like it.
If the people are unhappy with my actions, then they will make it clear.
So the courts do not apply. Laws do not apply. Only the people's voice. Is that what you're saying?
It has been a long time since laws have been enforced in the colony, and we would very much like to take responsibility for doing so ourselves, so that we can police the space lanes safely and thoroughly.
I think we can safely say, Councillor, that your attitude when it comes to policing is a little excessive, but we appreciate the need.
It's the same flavour, isn't it? It's the same, because what strikes me with the live streaming content, it feels to me that it's the answer to the problem that the digital world has created, which is, you know, we're separate. We don't have physical communications or groups that we attend. You know, we're so much more separate now because we interact digitally. But the live streaming really strikes me as the counteraction of that. You're building that community. There's direct communication between the creator and the individual, which you don't get really on YouTube or Spotify or anything like that. And, you know, normally the audiences are kind of much smaller, but it is a much more direct, you know, it's that communication. So as you say there, then when they're sharing those experiences together, it's a similar, angle like that.
No, exactly. And I think it's what I love about the whole kind of range of these kind of opportunities of telling stories, because I think we're in a post-traditional media world. Whilst we have the streaming channels, the Netflix and so on and so forth, I think it's really interesting how the diversification of channels has kind of destroyed the engagement with some of those channels, because we've got to pay Disney and Paramount and Netflix and Amazon and everybody else. I think we get to the stage where we can't be bothered with it anymore. There's so much content being created by innovative voices, you don't have to pay upfront to access. So I think there's an opportunity that really can even go even further. Is that fair, or am I being overly?
No, I think you're exactly right with it. I think it boils down to its cost of distribution. This is what the internet has allowed us to now efficiently communicate, you know, a very specific need to a very specific audience there, to a point where we can have a one-on-one relationship now. Yeah. The difficulty comes in. Literally we do.
About that.
Yeah, but that's the point. I mean, you think of old Howard Hughes when he bought a TV station, didn't he, in Las Vegas, so he could choose what films he was having on. But now you don't obviously have to do that. Individually, we can decide what we want to watch, what we want to consume, which therefore opens up much more wider range of taste. It doesn't have to be broad anymore like the broadcasts were. They were purposely appease all, but don't go into any sort of details, because it had to just kind of tick enough of the box for everyone. But we don't want that anymore. We can get specific content from specific creators. And
whilst I agree with that, I'm going to challenge it a little bit because I think that there is a herding quality that we have with content. I think we want to find a place to find it, and I don't think algorithms are very helpful for smaller creators to be discovered. Is that?
So that's my next point. You're 100% on the mark there. So in my theory, so it's physics again. It's mass attracts mass. You know, that is once you have mass, it's easier to collect more and more. So whilst we can then have all of these independent creators out there doing it, the discovery becomes a problem, which is kind of where we're at in the field. So the creators that already have an audience are going to be shown to more people and are going to attract more of an audience. And that's when you kind of go back to the same, we re-engineer the wheel. We come back to networks, we come back to TV channels and stuff. So we do have the opportunity now, though, with the technology we have to counteract that in the same way that we can go against, you know, the physics of gravity keeping us on the planet. We can put resources and energy into a rocket, very expensive, but we can break free and we can put those resources into really good discovery algorithms. Or if you have the financial resources, you can invest in paid advertisement, which can push against that. But you're totally right. Discovery, it will always kind of resort back to these basic principles. And we're seeing the discovery problem now. I mean, back in the day with the YouTube stuff, it was a quieter audience, it was a quieter marketplace. And the occasional people can still come from zero and they can hit the gold and get a big one, but it's much, much harder. I mean, even back in the day when the Yogscast was doing it, I tried to do my own imitations, you know, jump on the bandwagon when I was younger, and I still got a couple of 100,000 views on those videos. Nowadays, if I put a video up, I get free views, you know, and it's so much harder because it's such a busier market. But yeah, you're totally right. There is that part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's that blue water thing. You know, I kick myself because I feel like back in the day, at 98, my first games event, we had a thing called Quakadelica. And I joined as the new boss of the team, but I had nothing to do with organising it. But we had the Ministry of Sound, which was a big nightclub at the time, taken over for a games event, and we had a boxing ring set up in the main area with screens showing the gameplay live to the audience. We had a page 3 model called Joe Guest as a commentator and an actual sports commentator as well. Amazing setup. We also hired the guy that beat John Carmack at Quake to come over and play the winner. Amazing festival. Now, why did I not realize that not only were we seeing probably the first esports event in the UK ever,
Yes, yeah,
but also the start of a form of entertainment that was going to be the most watched thing on, well, more or less the most watched thing on the internet, more watched than most sports.
Yeah. Well, this is being too early to market with these things is you kind of, it's like being an artist. It's a felt sense. You and the organizers knew that there would be an interest here. So you felt it out there, but the reasons why probably aren't as clear. You know, the conscious part of it.
Scalability wasn't possible. The routes to market, like you say, weren't possible. But you know, but it's so easy to get distracted. But again, I think what I hope that highlights, though, is that there is a common human desire for spectacle. Now, in that context, that's all visual. It's a game. It's screens. It's about presentation. We're talking here about the audio side, the podcast side. And like you say, it is a bit blurred, but there is something, I think, special about an audio piece, particularly the ability to do other things.
Yes.
Which I think is absolutely marvelous. You know, for me, as somebody who's very ADHD, I like to have something to distract me so I can focus. And having lots of noise going on, I find works. I need some hear voices to sleep. I have to put, you know, my headphones on and sleep with those on. But everyone will have a different reaction to this. But I do think it's something about the ability to do other things as well as an important factor when you're deciding what kind of content you're trying to create. I mean, does that make sense? When you're looking at content, are you thinking about the mode of use of that content?
Not so much when we commission work or when we approve podcasts or not, mainly because we're so close to the fire, so to speak, with that.
Yeah.
We don't have the luxury of kind of looking that far back with it. But In general, yeah, totally right. And I think, as you say, it's kind of, I see it as like it's a compression algorithm, really. How much data can you convey to the listener or the viewer, as efficiently as possible? And if you're adding video, you're not necessarily conveying any more, but you're strangling that bandwidth there because you're requiring the visual. Yeah, visual. So if it's audio only, it's a much more efficient can be a more efficient data transfer there. And, therefore freeing you up for your tasks around the house or your day-to-day. And, I tend to put a lot of stuff on and I don't realize I've listened to, like you, it's the ADHD. I need something plugged into it. And, but I do pick up the odd thing. So although, I may have listened to 2 hours of an interview and I kind of caught one line, what else would I have been doing with that 2 hours? I was still getting on with my work. It was just the parrots in the background we've got at home probably squawking. That's what I would have heard.
You do pick up things. I mean, for me, I'm often listening to, stories and dramas. It's influencing the way I think about writing stories and the way I think about creating games. Listen to tons of science and history podcasts. I'm massively into skeptical podcasts. There's so many different things and tastes, and it's that variety that makes it interesting to me.
Exactly. It's I think it's part of that creative mind again, which probably brings it back into sort of the ADHD and the similarity we've both got there. But my life feels like a game of, I think they call it Pelmanism, which is, do you remember the old card game where you turn over one, it's a candlestick, and then you get next one's a bathtub, then it's a cat, and then you get candlestick, and you're matching them up. And my life feels like that. And it's I'll have a meeting next week with a podcast that wants to come onto the network, and they'll say, I've got this idea, but we're missing a component. And then I'll think to 3 years ago where I saw that candlestick turn over in another podcast, which I thought I'd forgotten. You go, match, this is the solution. So I think you need to expose yourself to as many of these influences that are out there as possible, to then it builds up that catalogue, and then when those connections are drawn in the right time, you see the connection and then the value kind of comes out.
Exactly that. And I kind of, as an audience member of, again, I'm coming at it from the point of view of looking at storytelling, and I can see the value of a scripted play or scripted story. I can see the value of the audio soundscape that's been crafted by the sound designer and how that helps communicate the story. But then I see the improvised experiences and the devised pieces, and I kind of admire the kind of actor kind of responsiveness to that and how that changes the way the storytelling works and takes us down paths that maybe you wouldn't have expected, and how that ties into the tabletop. And you see the same thing, but now the rule structures are providing the framework, not the kind of improvised kind of conceit. A dice roll taking a factor. And to me, that is just allows us to see different rich ways of storytelling. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. Again, it comes back to, for me anyway, it comes back to art, which is you never know which piece is going to be the next, all art's gone from my mind, trying to come up with a quote there. The next sunflowers, Van Gogh's sunflowers, something like that.
Yeah.
The next one, you don't know what it is, so you've got to start painting, and we've got to allow every artist to paint everything out there. And it's not a precise process. So the more content that is created, the more stories that are told, the more it's refined, and there are some awesome pieces out of all of that you want to hang in your house. It's
And Van Gogh, how you pronounce it, I know they're supposed to say it like cock or something. I can't remember exactly. But however you're supposed to pronounce it, my Dutch and Flemish friends will hate me for not saying it correctly. But this is the guy who died in more or less poverty and has created the art that has defined generations. And I think that hopefully we're in a world where the speed to adoption is significantly improved. So hopefully fewer people are having to get that frustrated. But, we are we have so much content. So with that in mind, because you're coming at it, so again, just turning the kind of tables a little bit, we've been talking as much more as consumers of this kind of medium. Now, as somebody who has to commission or kind of select medium, what's driving your thinking? I'm presuming you're thinking about audiences to an extent, but what is driving your thinking?
So the more time I spend in an industry and with people within the industry specifically, the more office-minded I get, happy Mondays, and it's the bottom line and everybody's following the same sort of processes. And it definitely clouds the creativity, and you find yourself, okay, we're looking at the bottom lines, we're looking at the numbers, we're looking at the hard facts. And for example, in podcasting at the minute, really, the hard fact is it's that discovery. Even as a network, it's difficult for us. So we have to look at how much of an audience you have already, or who are you to then bring in an audience? Do you have an audience elsewhere on social media or, on mainstream broadcast? Can you bring that one in? And that's a very, very boring way of looking at it. And well, it is fact, but I'm trying to, I think, come down to this other part of me, which is that ultimately, if you're making good quality stuff, if you're as authentic as you can be, then maybe the audience might not be massive, but the quality of what you're doing and therefore the opportunities based on that, I feel like it's an axiom. It's a truth that I kind of need to ground myself in as much as possible, because otherwise we'll only have the same sort of shows that have the same sort of audience sizes, and it's not very interesting, and you don't know who could have joined the network because they had heard one of our other shows that might have had a smaller audience. So our UK listeners will understand this, but when I try and tell this to the Americans, they always it takes some explaining, but the 5 a day, eat your 5 a day fruit and veg campaign, I kind of come back to that when I come to commissioning and looking at the network strategy of who we want to bring in. But rather than fruit and veg, it's types of podcast, so we're gaming and geek culture. And as a listener, the average podcast listener listens to about 5 episodes a week. So those 5 episodes, can we populate that for them? And it's not all going to be gaming entertainment. That's the same as just eating cake. You kind of, a bit of cake is nice.
Cake.
Yeah, I mean, and personally, I do like a little bit too much cake. But what's good for us, what's healthy for us, is the wider range, isn't it? You've got to have your vegetables in there. So we try and go, is there going to be gaming news that's going to be relevant, they're going to be curious about? And that would different types and how the news is, what news is focused on and how detailed will appeal to different people. So we need a range of podcasts in that space. So you've got the narrative and the storytelling there. You've got the games development side of things is an area that, people are going to have those interests in. So we try and mix this all up. I said earlier as well about mental health. We thought, can we bring in a podcast that, definitely some mindfulness and meditation. That was one. So we did Mindfulness for Gamers. That was a podcast that we've got on the network as well. And it's mindfulness practice, but through the gaming lens. And, so hopefully that's going to appeal to our audience there, and can we give them that healthy sort of diverse range rather than the whole dopamine button pressing content that we see a lot of now? Can we help people? So that's what I try and ground myself in, but it is always balanced by the facts of how the industry works.
No, I think it's entirely valid, because, like I said, we are dealing with essentially a hit-driven business, like any content business, and being able to predict not just what the hit is, but what if you give this person exposure, whether this works out or not, the next thing that they do, because you see the talent, because you see that they're learning, they're paying attention, and the mood and mode and the timing and all that kind of aspect of it, the chances that these guys are going to give you the next big thing.
Yeah. So I try to the thing with creativity and those organic moments, they're so hard to calculate. That's by their very nature. So I can't have too many fixed rules, but I have to give myself boundaries to kind of work within. So we do have to have a minimum number of downloads, because otherwise it costs us too much to host it, doing all the admin and stuff like that. But I mean, other than that, I kind of like to just allow the things to happen. And that does mean that there are a lot of podcasts that are really, really good, and then they don't have sort of large numbers, and they find their audience, and it's a really good tight audience, and then it just kind of adds to that diverse content for us. But you don't know those connections. As I said, does that lead to something else? So as from the business part of running the network, we do have to pay the bills, and the more money in, the more investment we can do, and the more we can support our other podcasters there. So we have to kind of have that as our goal there. But
it ends up being quite complicated, because you've got who are creating material. That talent can change their desires of what they want to do next.
Yeah.
And if that stops following things which are commercially effective, that seems to me to be a massive question for you to deal with.
Yeah. We're luckily, with technology now and the way creators are coming into the space, are self-reliant to most of a degree. So they're producing the shows most of the time themselves, and that takes off so much of the financial burden for us. So the more efficient we can make the process, and the management of podcasts, the more that then the less restrictive we have to be, the less requirements we have to put on. And as a network, we do want to we want to cherry pick the best and suitable, but we also want to be as free and easy, because we don't want those restraints on the creative people out there, because every audience is different. And we started off the conversation before we hit record, wasn't it? It was AI had come up, and definitely our audience is something that they really don't like, and they've got very good reasons for that. So when you're working with things like that, every audience is different. Some are more opposed to it, some are less opposed to it. There are other things that totally fine with. So we tend to give the freedoms to our creators to choose those things. So, we're never going to force ads on them, because every audience is different. So we like to give as much of that freedom and flexibility over to just allow organically for those creative things to happen. And if they don't happen, then it's an indirect value to us. It's that diversity. We can't calculate it, but I intuitively feel that it is so valuable to have even the smaller ones on there. Just good quality podcasts there. So it does cause a bit of friction between the planning, and the more business side of things. But I do think it's important to keep that balance
because of the lower barriers to entry, because of the processing, the fact that you don't have to worry about the programming in the same way. Oddly, it's kind of it's freeing because your discovery funnel includes different channels. The more you have in the channel, the more freedom there is for other people to not necessarily have the same cadence.
Exactly, yeah. It allows for greater freedom, greater efficiency there. So we've actually got one of the lowest sort of minimum download thresholds for a network out there. And I said our restrictions in our areas, so we do really try to be as free as possible to just allow for those sort of those things to happen there. And then that works then across the network. It allows other people to have those things, and then the relationships and the cross-pollination from that there. But it is tricky because it's very felt rather than businessy on paper.
Oh, exactly, and as I say, we're part of the Fable Folly Network. There's a different group, and I probably shouldn't be on that network because I don't have the audience yet. But I think what I like about that group is, and I think this is what you're doing as well, it's the cross-fertilization between the group. It's the common shared knowledge, the sense of common endeavor between the groups. We're trying to make something cool and interesting. Here's how I can support you. You run my ad, I run your ad, that kind of thing. And obviously for this particular podcast, it came about because not just people favorite point, but generally people are meeting in the tabletop scene, yourself at the podcast show, finding people who just want to talk about how do you make the most out of this space. I find that incredibly joyful.
Yeah, the collaborative nature of that and the support is just it's really good to see when it happens. It's magic, and that is it's trying to foster that, and so so again from our point of view as a network, it's can we provide that space? I as a network, I'm not going to know all the details on specific games or news and journalism or these sort of things. So can we devolve those responsibilities? Exactly. Yeah. Can we just take the boring back end? I do the spreadsheets, track the numbers, pay the bills. And kind of to then facilitate those connections and that cross promo relationship, but then let you guys do what you're really good at as podcasters, which is you've spent years as fans and playing the games, so you've got all that knowledge there to then transfer. And if there are some things that we hear as a network, Spotify changes their rules slightly, then I can share that information and kind of just tweak a little bit around the edges. But it's trying to be as hands off as possible and just let the art happen.
So, I mean, obviously, great chatting around the kind of whole context of us as consumers of the content and purveyors of the content, for whatever better. Let's talk a little bit about the practicalities of working within a network. And, I mean, I can kind of give the contrast between what I've experienced with Fable Folly and yourself. And obviously, I've got my kind of games industry kind of comparison. What should somebody, let's say someone's got some numbers and they come to you and they say, I'm interested in being part of a wider network. You've already mentioned numbers being the key factor. What would they expect and need to do to engage with you?
Really, the numbers is the hard requirement, the minimum download. So we say as an network, 10,000 minimum monthly sort of downloads as a starting point. That sort of then it doesn't really cost us too much to host you and all the other bills that we kind of have to pay for there. But beyond
the sustainable minimum, yeah.
Yeah, just the real floor for that. And it's quite low. I think normally it's around 50,000. Some people it's around 100,000 for mainstream sort of networks there. Other than that, it's really it's on a case by case basis. I'm always keen to hear everything out there, because you don't know what you don't know. So if you've got a podcast that's that's very niche, or you're tackling a very specific game, 100% we want to hear about it. Because you never know what could be really good there. Other than that, it's all really optional. There are things that we would encourage, sort of like regular releases, to keep the audience there and in place. There are certain ways to structure episodes and things help. Number of ads if you want, enough money to then help you create more episodes. There's all of those sort of things. But the rest of it's really sort of discussion.
So for me, I basically essentially help kind of the Fable Folly guys put my stuff into, actually they did it for me, into their megaphone account. They then showed me the kind of structure. I obviously upload content and run it as you expect. But there's a process of engagement that needed to happen. Some of my working practices that needed to happen. Is that fairly typical?
I think for most networks they are, and they can be much more rigid as well. There are some networks that I have seen agreements where, they will tell you how many ads per episode, where those ads are going, and you're required to approve a certain high percentage of those ads as well. So they take away the flexibility around that. Also, requirement to release, like you have to release a certain amount of episodes. You can't really have any days off. And I totally understand those things, especially when you're working at the large numbers as well. From a business point of view, you need to plan. You need to be able to plan inventory, book in those ads for the future. So you do need the consistency. But that's kind of where we come to those differences again between sort of YouTube and the podcasting world, because working with people, creators that have just been making it themselves, they're used to the freedom and the flexibility. Sometimes they don't even know what they're going to make until they sit down on the computer, especially if it's the more casual Let's Play stuff. So for trying to promote that is an absolute nightmare. I mean, we're happy to do it because it's great content, but it really does then restrict you going forwards. One of our benefits of being in the network, and with other networks will be the same as well, is we have relationships with the platforms like Spotify and Apple. But this is one of the things that comes up. It's great when they choose to highlight one of your podcasts, and we can request that, and kind of get a bit more eyes on it. But they require 2 weeks notice and very clear what the podcast about, why it's special, and information like that. So coming from very creative people that don't know necessarily the day they're going to record or when it's going to be released, or even the subject, it means that those sort of doors are closed to us when we're trying to help grow and promote. And the same comes when it's
closing. Yeah. They're also closing the sponsor doors as well. So where there is those specific deals where a specific sponsor wanting a specific audience, if you haven't got that pipeline of this is what's coming up, how could that even be possible?
So this is where it gets really, really difficult planning inventory. So we need to know, like, if you're going to release 4 episodes a month, and those 4 episodes have 2 pre-rolls, 2 post-rolls, and you do, 10,000. So it's 10,000 times 8, the 80,000 there, impressions that we can make available for sale. And then we'll go out and we'll book, I don't know, Domino's Pizza or someone like that to then buy 40,000 of those. And then you take that time off on holiday where, we've then got to go, sorry, to the sponsor. So the business does start to affect it overlapping.
That sponsor at that point, haven't you?
Yeah, you don't get many make goods, as we call them, with it. You do have to kind of meet and it does. That's where that translation comes in as my role. It's understanding where that line is for the creators, because creators, they do like structure and they like the clear rules. But there is a bit that for them, the return versus the effort doesn't line up, and so it's knowing that and translating what they need to hear to try and putting them forward for arrangements that fit them and fit the way they work, there. But it's easier with the more podcast people because they're kind of used to that. But I mean, it can get into all sorts of nuances of details of the types of ads you get from the UK. So if you're a UK-based podcast with the majority of your audience, you're going to get seasonally booked ads normally. So, we get a big period around Christmas. January's dead, and various fluctuations throughout the year, and they're mostly non-host read sort of stuff, whereas in the US it's constant activity and they're mostly host read. So depending on how much audience you've got here and there will affect what offers you get and the types of ads in and how far they're planned, and so it's our job to filter that out.
Yeah, I was having this very same conversation with another producer recently. Exactly that. The dominant US audience and its impact on your commercialization was something they talked about. And I think it's fairly obvious that there's a much more advertiser-friendly context in that space. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it should be ad-driven. And that conversation, Hen was talking about how they will not put middle roll in because it would disrupt their narrative. I get that. Completely fine. For me, I'm less worried about that per se because I happen to have a narrative form which is 20 minutes of play, then a debrief. So I actually
More
have
natural.
a natural plot where that would work. I don't have the numbers yet, but when assuming I get there, that will be a very good plot for that. But I think that my point here is more about you need the person who's the producer, creator, who has an honest understanding of what their goals are, to be able to that's in line with what you need as a network. Is that fair?
Yeah, and it's a constant negotiation because being on sort of both sides of this is, you can, if their goals are to monetize, to help them make more and more content, then, you've got to have, these are the realities, these are the boxes you've got to tick. But you've also got to be so, I think, respectful because it is the creators that are on the front line with their audience. And if they end up pushing a product which isn't good, doesn't fit the audience, then they're the first people to hear of it. And then they lose their audience. The risk is so high, and I don't think the advertisers really appreciate that. So we have pushed back quite a few times on certain advertisers, certain things they want to say. And we did have one a while back that they weren't fulfilling on the offer. There were some technicalities that it wasn't a smooth experience.
I'm not going to put words into your mouth, but the word honey comes to my mind.
That wasn't the one actually, but the honey have since come as a thing. But yeah, it's we called them up and said, well, if you want to do that, if you want to work with us, you have to do X, Y, and Z, and it involved more customer service people. And they fixed the problem based on what we had said.
Okay.
And we explained that in the next ad to the audience, and the audience responded well because people, I think, are reasonable. But you do just have to be respectful with the creators being on the front line because it's in their hands if it goes wrong.
And also, I mean, again, maybe it's because I come from the kind of like, for those who don't know, I was the evangelist for Unity's system that was used in games. We kind of helped introduce the whole rewarded ad process. But even in that context, we've seen major shifts in the user experience, which has made it a less good experience and has caused damage to game brand identities, even though it's not the games that did it. It's not even the advertisers that did it. It was the ad networks that made that decision because they wanted more revenue. And the reason I'm mentioning this is just because it shows that this is not something that's unique to podcast or audio. Ads is a thing. People experiment, and sometimes those experiments cause harm to the process. And we have to just find ways to be smart and adapt. Again, hopefully I'm making sense.
Yeah. No, it's a universal truth, really, isn't it? And it tends to be the people that run networks and, over in the advertising industry are very analytical, they're very comfortable with spreadsheets and things, and they're not at all familiar with the creative world. It's alien to them, even though they kind of work in it. It's very so. Is that a big part of my job is translating between that world and the creator world there and trying to find that harmony because it's got to be a long-term relationship, between wherever the revenue's coming from, the revenue source is coming from, the audience and the creators themselves. It has to work with everyone to be sustainable. Because ultimately, even audience want the creators to be paid for their time and for their work, and especially if there's production costs as well. Very quickly, if you've got an editor in, then you need to be a very large podcast to just pay for that one resource there, let alone some of the other fantastic content that gets made out there.
Or have a son who's.
So that does help, yeah.
But I do pay him, but I have other reasons to pay him. It's fine. It's all. But it's interesting because we talk about paying people, and a lot. If you don't already have an audience, if you are just starting out, the ability to be able to give talent what they deserve in pay is incredibly challenging. I mean, I currently don't pay any of the people who play, in my actual play. I've made a commitment that were we to get to the stage where that becomes possible, they get credits for the episodes that they're in. And I think the fact that they want to play anyway and that they're enjoying it is fantastic. And I'm very grateful for that. But it's incredibly challenging for people to get started in this space. I think it's less challenging, likely, slightly less challenging in the actual play space because you're doing something for fun. Whereas for a lot of voice actors in particular, and I know voice actors actually play too, but a lot of the scripted stuff, it is a necessity. If you're enjoying this interview, why not check out this brief trailer from our guest?
I'm honestly surprised, having seen like those Australian border police shows. Like, they don't let through, like, you know, someone's sandwich, let alone a fucking bag of forks of flies.
The reason I've stopped you here, okay, is that you've got a sandwich in your bag, and we can't have sandwiches.
It's exactly like that.
And they're always like, it is just sandwich. I just, I get hungry. I don't know if I have sandwich in Australia. We've got sandwiches here in Australia. They're very good. I'm going to have to destroy your sandwich. Please, it's family heirloom sandwich. When they opened up the sandwich, it was stuffed with cocaine. I don't know about cocaine sandwich. I don't know. It's always that.
So I used to run a radio station a while back. It's an independent one. I worked quite a lot with musicians, and it's a similar issue they've had for years. Very talented people putting a lot of time and effort and money to create things that people enjoy. But the actual bar for getting even breaking even is so high for them there, and it's not something that's been figured out. But I think the monetization is an obvious goal for a lot of people. But if you're thinking of it in the same way of your employed work, well, I'm putting in these hours and I'm putting in this amount of money for the resources, you're going to have a bad time because it's such a competitive space. Think of it as investing in yourself, and it might not be this that works out for you in this particular form, but the content. So that radio station that I started I was interested in audio, knew nothing about it, and I thought, well, what's the best way to learn very quickly? I'll start an independent sort of station out there, and I figured out how to do it on the job. And what then that taught me got me then this position here of how to run groups of people and networks and things like that. If I wouldn't have been able to do it, I wouldn't be able to get the training, even going to university to study these sorts of things. But I had to pay to do that, to pay to set it up, and rob Peter to pay Paul. So I think you don't be afraid to invest in yourself, in these things. And it might be a long-term payoff. But if you do, it's kind of, you've got to view it like that rather than the very immediate, well, it's cost me this to turn up at this gig now, and I've not been paid this amount, It's a hard one.
Notoriously like entrepreneurship, which I've spent far too much of my life trying to do. But I think it's very interesting when you talk to different people at different stages. Some of them have been able to get to the stage where you can at least pay the editor. Some of them have got to the stage where they've been able to give themselves something, have enough of an audience. But I think a lot of that revenue isn't coming from just ads. It's coming from those other avenues. For example, Patreon is the most obvious one. I mean, do you think that's inevitable? Do you think we'll see? I'm thinking about music and Spotify. Majority of bands get a very small amount of money for their plays, I would argue. I think that's pretty obvious and controversial. But it's live gigs, it's t-shirts, it's going on the road that gets them that revenue generally. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think you've got to be, and this is where I'm going to get controversial, but you've got to realize what you're selling. If there is the revenue portion to it there, that Spotify, allows people to get more access more of the time. It becomes more of a commodity, So I listen to more music because it is more available, not the same as where I would choose to buy an album. I'd have to really like that band. So it's, if you're selling a commodity, you're always going to be in a priced out, you're playing for the Amazons, the Tesco's, price is going to be thought out in there. But if you can view that as part of a transition, so, 5% of that audience will then really like you and they may part with money for a physical album. That could be part of the strategy there. Or as you say, those other methods of supporting, and they really do work well. There's a bit of an overlap we see. With smaller podcasts, it's those direct funding, those direct subscription models really help in supporting for the first I don't know, a good 100,000 views, that is the best way of doing it, the best return on it. Obviously, you're making extra content for that normally, and then that adds into your time. But that's normally your best place to find that sustainable base to start paying the bills, the editors and things. But yeah, so when you get to the 500,000 mark, the 400,000, that sort of size, that's when it tails off, because you start to get more and more ad opportunities at higher rates. Then it kind of goes the other way.
Scale,
but yeah,
scale matters with that, doesn't it? I mean, that's basically the rule of ads anyway, isn't it?
Yeah,
scale,
yes,
and again, that's what's happened in the video games industry, mobile in particular, less so in PC, obviously, because people. I still am convinced at some point, ad-driven models can work in PC. The trouble is, we've had so many bad actors doing terrible things to games that I can understand why PC game developers and PC game players aren't keen.
Totally a bad experience, doesn't it? Makes sense,
Yeah, I would be biased because I've some proportion of my career has been in trying to promote that kind of stuff. But I do think at the end of the day, there's one thing that really matters, and that is the audience value.
Yes,
and
at
how
the end of the day,
yeah.
So
yeah, Kuro, you were about to say, I'm interrupting you.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I was just agreeing. I think that audience is the core of it. Even if you are detached with sort of a pre-recorded thing, it's not as you're not there as close to them as if it's a live stream. There is a relationship there, and it has to be built on respect and trust, and you are delivering something of value to them, or you will lose them there. So.
I mean, in games, we often complain that we're kind of undervalued compared to film and TV and various other places. I mean, I do anyway. But there is a media fund out there. There are grants. There are prototyping funds. There's all sorts of things. I don't think any of that exists in audio drama and podcasts at all. Am I wrong?
No, and you're actually touching a nail on the head there, because at the minute there's just very recently been a little bit of a push to have podcasts recognised as a UK creative industry, because I think it's Canada or France, they have recently recognised it, and we go, well, why are podcasting, an audio first, why is that not recognised over here? So that is just starting now to hopefully get that sort of recognition. So yeah, you're ahead of times.
And well, again, maybe it's just because I've been wanting to do this stuff for a while, and I happen to work in a space where that stuff exists. Not as much as I feel it should. I mean, the bottom line is, if you think about it, the amount of access to doing this kind of stuff has reduced in cost dramatically, which is fantastic. But I don't think it's the case that people who come from underprivileged backgrounds or don't have some inherent income or wealth could realistically do this as much anymore, because the rate, if you take back to when Yogscast kicked off, they happened to hit the tide as the wave was traveling, and they went with the wave. Well, the wave's gone, and now we're high tide. Are we going to drown before we can get a new audience?
Yeah,
I'm butchering the metaphor.
No, I think it's totally true. The surfing analogy, if you've ever been surfing, this is how it works with new technologies or new industries coming up. You are trying to position yourself at the right time. If you're too early, it goes off ahead, but if you're too late, then it's gone. You are trying to catch that wave and ride the momentum in. It's the right place at the right time. The convergence of the demand for something with a new platform, which means there isn't somebody providing that demand, and and your ability to deliver on that. And it is always really difficult. And I think in life there are always going to be barriers, because everybody's experience is different. We've all got a different set of starting positions, but ultimately we do seem to be working on these things and slowly chipping away. And AI is obviously controversial for a lot of reasons, and I think can totally understand why. But the flip side of it is that the people that the accessibility barrier is broken down then, that monetary gone, because obviously you want to pay people fair wages for their work, whether it's the coding side, the development, or whether it's the artist side or the voice actors. But then that barrier is removed for somebody that doesn't have the money but has got a great story to tell, has got a great idea, and then they can get that out there to people then. So it's forever this trade-off of, it's a very difficult and complex argument. I can see both sides, but I think technology marches forward, and it's just how do we how do we handle it? But the accessibility barriers are slowly coming down. There will always be some, but we do seem to be pushing forward.
But I do think that, you know, there's a job to do in this space to allow other platforms, you know, particularly the platforms like TV, film, and, you know, radio, who I feel have yet to work out this space's potential, but also, you know, the Spotify's and so on and so forth, and the hosting companies. I think they've got a part to potentially play as well. I think we've got a rich and deep vein of possibilities of telling stories that have never been told before.
Yeah. And the more people that can access this now, you know, and can tell their stories, the more as a society, as a community, we can hear the stories and learn those lessons and take them on going forward. So we do all benefit. The more stories that are out there, you know, the more that we can all as a community kind of benefit from. And that's what's so exciting about this. It's like giving more people their paintbrushes to make art. You know, we're going to have so many more Van Goghs, Van Goghs, whatever it was, you know, that come out of it.
Or whatever they are. Something like that. But again, I think the thing in my head is that, you know, we're in a position where, you know, truth is at a premium, and you know, the way that we're talking to people, the isolation, and I think storytelling brings people closer together. That allows us to understand people. I think it has a tremendous force for good, potentially, if only we give it the air to breathe.
Yeah, it's so important. You know, those foundational stories are how we learn. You know, it's, you know, we don't just learn in school through academics and through science. We learn through art. It's that intuitive way to paint an explanation out there. We learn through stories. You know, we learn good versus bad, you know, and how things should work. And write a good story, the ones that stand the test of times are the true ones. Because you can write a story about anything, you could lie, but if it's not close to reality, if it's not close to your experience, you don't feel it's a good story. You don't come back to it, you know, and
connect.
Exactly, because you just know it's not on truth. You know that the reality's kind of gone there, and the true ones are the ones that really resonate, you know, especially throughout time. And I found it's amazing recently, speaking about a good friend who's been mentioned a few times, Van Gogh, that they figured out that he's Starry Night. The way he paints those stars, those spirals, are, I'm going to totally butcher it, but they're mathematically correct with how galaxies in the night sky distribute. And this is the whole point. That we don't know why it resonates to us, but he kind of probably wasn't even conscious, but he laid that out and painted this question and this for us there, this answer. And through the years, we've recognized it and got, we like that, we're drawn to it. We've not known why until they've figured out that that's what he was saying. He was pointing out this connection here of the distribution, something like that it was. But I think, you know, art is, it's not magic. It's just this gut felt sense way of starting to ask questions and answer them, you know, and that's where that value comes. And it's the same with storytelling. You know, it's not just a story for fun. It resonates a lesson for us, you know, out there, you know. Sorry, go off on a tangent there.
It seems to me that we both agree this is a fantastic medium. So many different stories to tell, whether that is scripted or improvised or with dice or simply people sitting down and having a conversation. Incredible space to be able to play in. So just to sum it up, if you had to give one piece of advice to somebody who was starting out right now, what would they need to do to be able to make something of it?
So the first piece of advice, and I think probably the most important, is to figure out what it is you are looking to achieve specifically, because as especially creative people, we get inspired. We see somebody doing something and we want to emulate that. We just feel we're drawn to learn what they're learning there and figure out those skills, or to create something, put it out in the world. So we go, I want to make a podcast. I want to play a show. I want to do this. But we don't ever know why. And without that why, you can't refine what it is that you're trying to do there. And very quickly people then, I see it all the time, that they then will default to the numbers game. And if it's just numbers, you're probably going to have a bad time and come away from it very quickly, because we're so spoiled now. We can see YouTube videos with tens of millions of views on them. So then when you get 300 downloads on your podcast, which that's 300 people that are choosing to listen to your story repeat, that's a lot. You know, we're kind of spoiled with it. So if you can come back to say, well, actually, what I want to achieve is I want to make some friends. I want to build connections within the industry. The community could be part of that. Or if it is revenue and money, then that's great. but at least then it will dictate the type of content you make then, and it'll help you on that journey. So yes, it's figure out what is the real reason you want to do it and what that objective is, and have that clear, because then you can sustain it and make the changes you need to get where you want to go.
So love it. And I almost need to change the name of the podcast to Why of Stories, because that seems to be such a common refrain. It's exactly what I say to game developers when they're starting out. What does success look like? And then
That's
we
the
can
question.
use numbers to measure how close we get to that.
That's it, yeah. What does success is the phrase there, and I think that's what won me my job interview when I was interviewed for this post. It was, I said to Rich, I said, so what does success look like in this position? And because otherwise, you're going on that imprecise gut. The gut is great, as we've said, but you need to know what it is, or else you can get misled in the numbers. And I get caught out of this with my own passion projects, like myself, that working with all these large numbers, and then I put out a very one that I want to do just for curiosity and to learn skills, and then I get, I don't know, 30 listens, if that, on something, and I'm like, well, and I get very disheartened with it. But it's coming back to, what was the point of it? Why was you trying to do it? And then get yourself back on track.
Why did you do it?
Exactly.
And a lot of the stuff I do is because I find it helps my mental health, it allows me to have my creative outlet. I get to spend some time with some amazingly cool people, and I watch them be tortured by my terrible, meaningless dilemmas.
But I think they're things. Yeah, that's it.
Sam, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for taking the time out to chat to me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
This has been your podcast. What do you think? Why are you wanting to make stories? What do you think about how we would build creative and interesting engagements? How do you feel about working with networks out there and trying to grow and scale the commercial side of what you're trying to build? Well, let's talk about that, and let's talk about that in new episodes. We'll be back next time. So please like, subscribe, share, follow, whatever it is you do on your platform. And we'll be back again soon talking to more amazing people about creating amazing